Great. So today I wanted to talk about sort of this idea of MEV redistribution and what it means for the economic incentives of validators. I wanted to present sort of a very simple model that might help us think about where this MEV revenue should go and how it should be redistributed to validators. So roughly the model is that we have sort of these validator pools or sets of validators that are facing uh, different sources of return, from where they can earn money. For example, they can earn rewards from staking. They can participate in lending. Of course, there's MEV, which is sort of the topic of this conference. They can engage in staking derivatives. There's this whole variety of places that they can collect returns from. And the frame that I want to sort of have for this talk is that they're going to view how much they participate in each of these different sources as a portfolio. So they're going to hold a portfolio over these different sort of sources of return. And in effect, what this means is that there's competition between these different sources. And so this is not a new idea. This is sort of going back to work on a security of proof of stake protocols, maybe all the way back to 2018 or 2019. But there's this idea that these different sources of returns are competing with each other based on the portfolios that these validators are constructing. But sort of the really important thing to note here is that one of these sources of returns is not like the others, because staking serves sort of a dual purpose. That it's a source of return for the validators, but it's also securing the chain. The staking sort of acts as a privileged source of return because it controls the economic security of the underlying chain, and at the same time is competing with other sources of returns for the validators. So I always want to have this frame in mind that we have this portfolio, but sort of one part of this portfolio is important in a way that the other parts are not, because it's securing the chain. And so there's this question, which is, can we use MEV as an incentive to, in some sense, improve the security of the chain, or other desiderata that we might have, and can MEV act as some kind of an economic lever to induce security, and can it be used as a way to get validators to avoid some bad economic equilibria that might arise? So we want to answer this question, and so we should just set some terminologies. We're going to have sort of this very standard model of a proof of stake protocol, which is going to hold some token supply, denoted by SFT. It's going to have some reward inflation schedule given by RFT, and then it's going to hold some kind of frozen liquidity. You might think of this as liquidity that's either protocol owned if this epsilon is positive, or it's burned if epsilon is negative. And then you have a very simple sort of update for how the supply changes over time, which is just you take the supply at the last time step, you add however much reward got inflated, and then you add or subtract the protocol owned or burned liquidity. And the perspective we're going to have from the validator side is that, again, they're viewing this as a portfolio optimization problem. Right? They're thinking about, I can collect returns from all of these different sources. What should I do? This is, again, a sort of a well-studied problem. They're going to do some kind of a mean variance trade-off. Right? They're going to look at the sources of return that they can get. So suppose those sources of return are, I can earn from staking or I can earn from lending. They're going to compute a mean return for each of those sources. Of course, this could include other things like derivatives if they're engaging in those. And then they're going to trade off the return against the variance of these assets. And then here, of course, you have a risk parameter that tells you how you want to trade these two. But the point is that this is an optimization problem that you can solve if you have good estimates of the mean returns and of the variances. Sort of the important thing here is, how does this choice of portfolio actually update the returns that you're accruing from staking, lending, MEV, etc. So here's a simple sort of model that's been that we've been looking at recently, which is that every validator is going to have some staking yield that's going to come from two sources. So one source is just the natural inflation of the rewards, and another source, which I think is of interest, for this event, is what we're calling sort of this MEV bonus. Right? This is like any additional value that comes from the application layer that is then redistributed back to the validators. And this is going to be redistributed back in sort of a pro rata fashion relative to the portfolios that they're holding. So I look at all of the rewards that come from just from the inflation of the token. I look at all of the MEV that I'm trying to redistribute, and I send it back to the validators proportional to their portfolios. And then you have a analogous sort of lending yield. So you have yield that just comes from your favorite lending protocol, which takes on sort of this form that depends on the utilization. So you look at how much borrow demand there is, and then you scale it up by sort of some risk-free rate, and you update the lending yield at time t, sort of according. And so these are some sort of staking lending dynamics that you can try to analyze. Of course, here I'm just modeling sort of the deterministic part of these dynamics. I'm not actually modeling the randomness, but you can sort of add that in. And what we're trying to understand is, how do the portfolio decisions of these validators, namely by solving that optimization problem in the last slide, and the fact that you have some control over this parameter, how much MEV you want to redistribute back into the system, how does that affect the incentives here? And in particular, does it help us avoid some bad outcomes that we might otherwise, have if we didn't do this, if we didn't redistribute this MEV back? So let me just sort of do the first part, which is it's been known since sort of around 2019 and 2020 that staking, which is this privileged sort of source of return that is securing the chain, is competing with other sources of returns like lending and derivatives. So in particular, this paper in 2019 by Tarun showed that if you want to avoid staking percentages going very low or below some threshold, you really need these inflationary block reward schedules in order to achieve this. If you just have sort of constant block rewards, and certainly if you have deflationary reward schedules, then you're going to end up in situations where all of the validators are roughly moving to lending, and you no one's staking, so the security of the network sort of breaks down. And this implies that sort of proof of stake protocols need to actually incentivize validators to keep staking and avoid looking for other sources of returns. They might look for them, of course, they might look for them off chain, but we're not modeling that right now. We're just modeling sort of how much they can get from activities that we can actually monitor. And this is also turns out to be true for staking versus derivatives. So it turns out that there's certain kinds of phase transitions where the validators are the derivatives are in fact parasitic on the proof of stake system. And so this sort of sets the stage for, well, if we want to solve this, of course, one way to solve this is just to inflate the rewards and then just keep validators staking that way. But we have sort of another lever available to us now, which is MEV. And the question is, can this MEV bonus in fact act as a way of bypassing this problem of having inflationary reward schedules or having to inflate your token too much in order to secure the network? And so the question is, how does this, sort of mathematical question is, how do these dynamics sort of depend on this parameter alpha and on this schedule, on this MEV extraction schedule Q? So one assumption that you can try to make is that this Q, this MEV extraction schedule, is in some sense dependent on the yields that you're getting from lending. And what is the reason to believe this might be the case? Well, because lending yields are roughly correlated with the rates at which liquidations are happening. And you might want to say something like MEV in the future is going to be correlated with the number of liquidations that are happening. So you could sort of try to put these modeling assumptions. And actually, this did turn out to be the case during, say, the Terra collapse in 2022. But we want to understand how these dynamics behave as a function of this alpha. And one can do sort of similar kinds of experiments and sort of theory. But the upshot here is that you can show that if this alpha is sufficiently large, if you're actually doing this redistribution back to validators, you can avoid having to do this inflationary, sort of highly inflationary reward schedule. And in fact, you can get away with things like constant inflation, and even in some cases, deflationary reward schedule, something like a Bitcoin reward schedule, which the staking sort of and lending papers sort of 2019 said would not work. So if basically validators are allowed to be incentivized to stake from sort of this application layer value that's collected by the protocol, then you can sort of massively reduce the requirements for necessary to incentivize validators to stake. And this is sort of very interesting because otherwise you would have to, find some way of keeping them keeping them engaged and trying to maintain security. So what I want to say now is that MEV redistribution sort of can act as an incentive mechanism to prevent people from pulling stake away from the network, and in some senses acting as a mechanism more generally to incentivize can be used as a mechanism to incentivize good behavior in proof of stake protocols. So usually we think of MEV as sort of this parasitic sort of thing, but it has these use cases as trying to incentivize staking, for example. But of course, this is not the end of the story, right? Because all I've said is that if you redistribute this thing back, it might sort of help secure the network. But the way that you do the redistribution and sort of the mechanics of this redistribution actually matter a ton. So it was noted that if you have these validator pools that are doing this smoothing or redistribution where they're paying out MEV rewards in some proportion to the amount that everyone has staked, this can actually reduce the variance of the returns that validators are collecting. So basically the smoothing is allowing validators to have some kind of predictable recurring revenues. And this also, because if you recall, so the way we set up this portfolio optimization problem, they're trading off risk reward. It might sort of have, it might cause validators to have less propensity to shift their portfolio allocations radically. They might have more stable allocations over time. And this might be desired for various reasons, not including, you don't want them to move around their stake too much. So there's this predictability problem, which is, how do you do redistribution to reduce variance? But I now just at the end just want to end on some future directions that redistribution sort of needs to think about, or redistribution research needs to think about, which is the first one that immediately comes to mind is what are the centralizing tendencies of this redistribution? If I'm taking this revenue that's being collected by the protocol, I'm just passing it back to the validators. Does it set up some kind of bad feedback loops that sort of end up centralizing stake or end up centralizing a certain validator? And I think this is a very important problem that I think should be studied a lot more. And then the next kind of class of questions that I was thinking about future directions is how can we use sort of these existing transaction fee mechanisms that are already present in proof of stake networks. They could be such that they can be modified to implement redistribution in practice. And why does this matter? Well, if you're doing this redistribution, you need actually some way to ensure things like off-chain agreements are not happening. Off-chain agreements between validators themselves or validators and other parties. And sort of this is roughly the question, which is, well, like, what is the cooperative game theory of validator pools? Do they have an incentive to actually stay in the pool and collect these rewards, or do they have an incentive to defect and collect rewards in some other way and not do the redistribution? So I think the game theories, or the cooperative game theory of these validator pools is sort of relatively understudied. It would be very interesting to see how this redistribution actually affects people's propensity to participate in these pools. And then broadly, can we prove things like sort of the closed loop incentive compatibility of this mechanism, that I'm going to do this redistribution after already collecting MEV revenue from users? What is sort of the closed loop incentive structure of this process? I think that would also be very exciting to study. So roughly what I wanted to end on is MEV redistribution can act as a way of incentivizing good behavior, at least from an economic security perspective, in proof-of-stake protocols, and can sort of allow you to avoid these really bad inflationary exponential inflationary reward schedules and make them sort of better and perhaps even constant or deflationary in certain environments. However, this comes at a potentially comes at a big cost, which is you might end up, centralizing the validators. And also there might be other kinds of game theoretic phenomena that are happening, like off-chain agreements between validator pools or between members of the validator pool to defect from the redistribution that they're earning. So with that, I will just end here. And if there's any questions, we have time for questions.